June 21, 1942, 9 a.m., the perimeter of Tobruk. The dust of the greatest German victory in North Africa had not yet settled. Tobruk, the impregnable fortress that had defied the Axis for a year, had finally fallen. Over 30,000 Allied prisoners were being herded into the desert sun, and the road to the Nile seemed wide open. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, stood atop his Greif-armored command vehicle, his face etched with the grit of the Sahara and the fatigue of a commander who led from the front. To Berlin, this was the pinnacle. To Hitler, it was proof that genius could overcome any obstacle. But as Rommel descended from his vehicle to inspect a captured British supply column, a massive autobahn of trucks stretching toward the horizon, the triumph began to taste like ash. He approached a standard Bedford 3-ton truck, its tires still thick with tread, unlike the shredded, patched rubber on his own dwindling fleet. He signaled a junior officer to pry open the rear canvas. Rommel didn't find the rusted cans of Alta Man, Old Man meat, or the moldy hardtack that his soldiers in the Afrika Korps had been choking down for months. Instead, he stepped into a treasure chest of industrial abundance. He pulled out a wooden crate. Inside, nestled in protective straw, were fresh oranges and lemons, still vibrant and fragrant. He moved to another crate. White bread. Not the gray sawdust-filled loaves of the Wehrmacht, but soft, bleached flour bread that looked like it had come from a London bakery just days ago. He picked up a tin of premium jam and a pack of high-quality cigarettes. Rommel stood in the heat, an orange in his hand, and looked back at his own column. His men were legends. Yes, they were the finest desert fighters in history. But they were skeletal. They were wearing boots held together by wire and driving captured British vehicles because their own had broken down weeks ago for want of a simple spark plug. In that moment, the tactical genius of the Desert Fox hit a brick wall of reality. He wasn't just fighting the British Eighth Army. He was fighting the combined factories of Detroit and Sheffield.
July 1942, near El Alamein. The logistical nightmare wasn't just in the food. It was in the very blood of the panzers. Rommel walked toward a captured Allied fuel depot. He watched as his mechanics dipped their fingers into the British petrol. High octane, the mechanic whispered, almost in awe. Clean, no sediment. Our engines would run for 1,000 kilometers on this without a stutter. The German logistics chain was a fractured 2,000-mile-long artery being bled dry by the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean. For every ton of fuel that reached Rommel's tanks, 3 tons sat at the bottom of the sea, sent there by British subs and torpedo bombers from Malta. The Germans were fighting with ersatz, substitute, oils, and low-grade fuel that clogged filters and seized pistons in the desert heat. Rommel reached down and picked up a pair of captured British desert boots. They were sturdy, with thick rubber soles and reinforced stitching. He looked at his own boots. The leather cracked, the soles worn thin by the abrasive sands. "Look at this," Rommel remarked to his chief of staff, Fritz Bayerlein, gesturing to a stack of Allied newspapers found in the truck. The papers were only 4 days old. They received newspapers from home faster than we receive ammunition from the next depot. The realization was a cold mathematical horror. Rommel knew that for every Tiger or Panzer IV he received, the Americans were landing 10 Shermans. For every crate of oranges his men liberated, 10,000 more were being unloaded at the Suez Canal. The British could afford to lose a battle. Rommel could not even afford to lose a truck.
November 4th, 1942. The retreat from El Alamein. The end came not with a brilliant tactical maneuver by Montgomery, but with the dry cough of empty fuel tanks. As the British began their massive counteroffensive at El Alamein, Rommel looked at his maps. He had the positions, he had the veteran crews, but he had no legs. His tanks were stationary pillboxes because they didn't have the fuel to maneuver. He stood in his command tent, staring at a report of Allied shipping arrivals. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of tons of steel, food, and fuel were pouring into Egypt daily. The logistics war had been lost months ago,
in the factories of the United States, a place Rommel's superiors in Berlin treated as a distant, irrelevant afterthought. "The spirit of the men is high," Rommel wrote in a grim dispatch, "but the spirit cannot drive a tank without petrol. We are being crushed by the weight of the enemy's production." He remembered the oranges from Tobruk. He realized then that the oranges weren't just food. They were a message. A nation that could ship fresh fruit across an ocean through a war zone was a nation that could never be defeated by tactical brilliance alone. As the Afrika Korps began its long, agonizing retreat toward Tunisia, Rommel looked back at the desert. He was the desert fox, a man who had outfoxed the British Empire for 2 years. But as he watched a swarm of Allied fighter bombers, fueled by endless petrol and flown by well-fed pilots, shred his retreating columns, he knew the truth. Germany had built a magnificent sword, but the Allies had built a factory that made swords by the million. The war in the desert was over, ended not by the sword, but by the supply truck.